Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Am I good with just the lapel? Yeah, that sounds good. You know, I'm mad at Mike Lee. I don't know why I said I'm never going to speak with Mike Lee again. We both have budgets that balance in 5 years, but he got 17 votes for his and I got 16 for mine. And I was the 17th vote for his, so I was like, now he did vote for mine, but I'm still jealous that he got 17 votes. But that kind of shows you where we are. This was a reasonable budget, balances in 5 years. Everybody else is like, oh, that's so extreme, 5 years. It's like, well, don't you have to balance your family budget every year? Doesn't sound to me like an extreme idea. I've got good news for you, though, and bad news. The good news is your government's open. The bad news is your government's open and still borrowing over $1 million every minute. And you may have heard the government shut down for a period of time. It was a little hard to notice because most of it didn't really shut down. 2/3 of your government's on autopilot. It's called mandatory spending. We don't vote on it at all. That's not to say that it isn't important or some of it shouldn't be voted on and shouldn't be approved, but 2/3 of your government just goes on. And that's what's causing the problem. It's entitlements, Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. And I'm not saying we get rid of them. I'm just saying we have to pay for them. You know, we have to make the balance of payments. For every dollar you pay in Medicare taxes, you take out $3.50. That's why it's $35 to $40 trillion in the hole, and we have to do something about it. So the government shut down, sort of, but 2/3 of the government kept going. And then the remaining third is half military and half stuff. So we got together pretty quickly and we said we should fund the military. So we kept the military open. So now we're at about 15% of the government was closed. And the president was concerned that maybe no one would notice that the government was closed and then it might not have to reopen. So what did the president do? He hired 100 workers, paid them overtime to work around the clock to wrap the World War II monument. There is no entrance, if you've ever been there, there is no entrance or exit. There is no one paid to watch the World War II monument. In fact, I think it was built with private donations. So they wrapped it and put barricades up. But if you want an image of the shutdown, you want to remember an image and tell people about the shutdown, here's the image you should show. The image you should see and the image you should tell people. The World War II veterans got off the bus with their wire cutters, cut the barricades, piled them on their bus, and piled them on the lawn at the White House. That's the image that will stick in my mind. So during the shutdown, we had some other interesting things we learned. They sent us a notice and they said, you need to list which of your employees are essential and which are unessential. I said, well, that sounds like a really good project, all of government. And that's actually what happened. So the EPA, I got the list on what the EPA reported, 95% unessential. Now, you'd think there'd be a lesson learned there that we would learn 95% unessential. We didn't really learn the lesson, but we did learn about a guy named Jonathan Beale. He'd been working at the EPA for 11 years. He'd been given performance bonuses, good performance reviews, year after year. Jonathan Beale was just a stand-up kind of guy. But when they were looking for essential and unessential, somebody said, where is he? And they said, oh, he hasn't been here in 6 months. And they said, well, why? Well, he works for the CIA. And there was like, really? A guy at the EPA works for the CIA? And so someone had this brilliant idea. Let's call the CIA and ask him. Apparently, he does not work for the CIA. And I can only imagine him laying by the pool, drinking a beer, and when the boss calls him up, he's like, I'm in Istanbul, can't come now, secret mission in Istanbul. So we go through all this, and they finally fire him. I think he's going to have to pay some back fines. But to add insult to injury, you know what his specialty was? Global warming. He is the most knowledgeable, most expert person on global warming policy. In fact, Gina McCarthy routinely got advice from the guy, I guess when he was not on assignment in Istanbul. From all of this, though, we should take some kind of message home. The question is, are we ready to do something about it? Are there enough people up here ready to do something about it? And frankly, there are with you up here. The problem is there's not enough in Congress yet. People say, well, how could we ever cut? And the president's like, oh, woe is me, we'll never be able to cut. Where can we cut? And so I sent him a note. I'm still waiting on a response. But I sent him a note and I said, well, do you know that $100 billion is unaccounted for? Every year in the budget, over $100 billion is missing. They know they spent it. They may have even spent it on something they were supposed to, but they don't have a record of it. Over $100 billion. You can save $6 billion a year simply by not rehiring the people who retire. We're not even talking about laying off or firing federal workers. Just don't rehire the ones that retire. When we finally started doing this, we did start saving money. The president waited 1.5 years to do it. Remember in the debates, he said, oh, there won't be a sequester? If 1.5 years he'd been planning for this, he would have already saved $9 billion simply by not rehiring people. But in case the president doesn't really want to know about the bigger ticket items, I've tried to point out some smaller ones that ought to offend him. One of the ones is some of the stuff comes from Tom Coburn's Waste Book, which you should all look at if you haven't seen. One of my favorites is there's a shrimp on a treadmill, and the question is, would a sick shrimp run less on the treadmill or less fast than a healthy shrimp? Does anybody know the answer? I really think that the shrimp on the treadmill, I think it's part of the Let's Move campaign by Michelle Obama. Yeah. The list goes on and on. I'll give you one more example. We spent $500,000 developing a menu for Mars. If you know, because that's imminently coming up, we have to be ready. So it's a great job if you've got a 26-year-old kid at home living in your basement and you wish he had a job or she had a job, pays $5,000, 2 weeks, all expenses paid in Hawaii, and you have to think about food. And the prerequisites are you have to like food. It's really hard to get this job. So after 2 weeks on Hawaii, $5,000, all expenses paid, what do you think a bunch of college kids came up with? Pizza. Then I discovered the other day that we actually spent $125,000 developing a 3D pizza maker. So now we have a 3D copier that can make a pizza. I'm wondering if they're going to transport that to Mars or exactly how that's going to work. I don't know. Sometimes I'm encouraged, sometimes I'm discouraged. I'm encouraged when I see you guys all here and that you're energized still and that you want change. But sometimes I'm discouraged. And I'll tell you one thing that happened not too long ago that sort of puts all of this in perspective and lets you know how much we really still have in front of us that has to be changed. There was a vote in the House on eliminating $3 million for Twiggy the water skiing squirrel. Now, I like dumb pet tricks, and if you send me an email with one, I'll look at it because I think they're hilarious, but I don't really feel like paying $3 million for it. Twiggy the water skiing squirrel is the promoter that we pay $3 million to promote selling walnuts in India. Now, what business that is of the government, I don't know, but we spend $3 million on it. You would think that's low-hanging fruit. That we might be able to cut out the $3 million for a water skiing squirrel, and you would be wrong. They had the vote, and the vote was 320 to keep the squirrel and the $3 million, 98 to cut it. Over half of the Republicans voted to keep the $3 million. But here's my point, and here's what they would say to you. Oh, you cut $3 million, you'll never balance the budget. Well, hell, you got to start somewhere. But the other... But the real moral to the story is if you cannot cut $3 million, when are you going to ever have the courage to look at the entitlements, which is where the real money is? They can all be fixed. It can all be done gradually. You can do all of Social Security and Medicare without ever affecting anybody who's currently on it. You just have to gradually do some changes. My generation and below are going to have to wait a little longer. We're living longer. We used to have like 16 workers for one retiree. We're less than 3 workers for one retiree. It's all demographics. I tell people, they say, well, it's Republicans' fault. It's not Republicans' fault. It's not Democrats' fault. It's your grandparents' fault for having too many damn kids. It's demographics. We had big families, and big families, they're all retiring. Now we're having smaller families. The next generation had smaller families. And then we've been overly generous with some things. Apparently, if your head hurts and you're anxious when you go to work, you can be disabled for the rest of your life without ever having a physical exam, without ever having another medical exam, forever. I think we should stand up and say that's a disgrace to the people who truly are disabled. And we need to get the freeloaders off the rolls. In order for us to be a bigger party, though, we have to reach out to more people, not just those of us here. It has to be a bigger party. It has to be a bigger movement. There are times, and I don't think it is our movement, but there are times when people are using language that shouldn't be used. And I recently criticized someone for using some of that language, and I'm not going to bring it up, but I will say that we can disagree with the president without calling him names. We can disagree. I disagreed almost all the time with the president, okay? But I don't call him names, and I am polite to him when I meet him, all right? And so I'm not saying that's our problem. I'm just saying there are people out in the public that are taking away from our message. So let's try not to be part of that. When we present our message, if we want a bigger crowd and we want to win politically, our message has to be a happy message, one of optimism, one of inclusiveness, one of growth, one of a message that actually brings up the people who are poor among us, brings up those who are long-term unemployed and finds them jobs. Our message is that, but we have to figure out a way to make sure everybody knows that that's what we're here for. Did anybody here drive up to Washington today because you want to help out billionaires or millionaires? Probably nobody in here is a millionaire or a billionaire. We're all average middle-class people. We want to help the average middle class and those who are beneath us to get ahead. The opportunity of the American dream is what we're all here for. That's the message we have to get through. There's a painter by the name of Robert Henry, and I like the way he puts optimism. He said to young painters, he said, paint like a man coming over the hill singing. I love the image of that. Paint like a man coming over the hill singing. I think if we become the movement, or maybe the party, or however you want to participate, but if we become the movement that proclaims our message with the passion of Patrick Henry, but also like a man coming over the hill singing, I think then we'll be the dominant party again. Thank you very much.